self-actualization, including a book called Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow, which is actually part of the reason you invited me to come and speak at Aging 2.0, Stephen. And I wasn't feeling very joyful or self-actualized, which is a bad sign. And it was during that time, during the Great Recession, that I had 5 friends, all similarly aged to me at that time, commit suicide. And I actually was one, I considered it myself, for a whole collection of reasons that I won't go into now, unless during Q&A somebody wants to ask me more. But what I will say is I fortunately got to the other side of that and was able to sell the company at the bottom of the market and opened up to what was next. And there's a great, if you've seen the movie The Intern with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway, it's a great quote from De Niro in the movie where he says, musicians don't retire, they quit when there's no more music left inside of them. And I knew I had music inside of me, I just wasn't sure who to share it with.
I love the, I love that line. And that's, I think, has been one of the sort of pop culture reframings of the whole world that we're in. And back in 2015, it was, as you said, this your book Peak, which was not particularly something that you were known for. I say it was like this Airbnb hotelier, but this Peak book was really influential for me because essentially you were taking the Maslow hierarchy of needs and applying it to business sense and applying it to the idea that actually what we need to do is to elevate employees, elevate customers, and even elevate investors into a sense of them having a better experience, and you, as your role as a curator and as a businessman, have a much deeper purpose than just making money. And I think back to that stage when you wrote this, and this is one of your, I think, 6 books. I mean, you're constantly kind of coming up with these new ideas and writing things, but that idea of elevating, I think, is certainly lasted with me. And we've actually created a new topic team called Elevating Caregiving, which is really trying to reinvent the role of caregiving right now. That's just a new thing. But can you just give us a quick summary of what your sort of main sort of message in Peak was and how it's applied in your business?
Sure. So Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs had 5 levels on it, and they went from physiological to safety needs, which were sort of survival needs, to social belonging at the 3rd level, esteem at the 4th level, which were sort of succeed needs. And then at the peak of his pyramid was self-actualization, which is sort of a transformation need. So I had in the bottom of a recession, the recession before the Great Recession, which was the dot-com bust and 9/11, I was reading Maslow and I just said, well, there's really 3 basic themes in life: survival, succeed, transform. And what if we actually looked at our key stakeholders, our employees, our customers, and our investors, and we created a hierarchy of needs pyramid for each of them based upon those 3 levels: survival, so succeed, transform. So for an employee, it's money, recognition, and meaning. For customers, it's meeting their expectations, meeting their desires, and meeting their unrecognized needs. And the companies that create evangelists as customers are those that meet those unrecognized needs. And then for the investor pyramid, it's something like it's transactional alignment, which basically means we have the same definition of the business, relationship alignment, and legacy or mission alignment. So it's a book I wrote, and based upon my own experience, my living library, a laboratory of my own company. But along the way, when I was studying and researching the book, I found like every companies from Southwest Airlines to Apple. Apple created their retail stores based upon Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Who knew that? Who else? A bunch of companies had, Harley Davidson had used Maslow in their strategic thinking, mostly around employees or customers. And so I wrote the book. It became a big success, and a bunch of other companies, from Tony Hsieh at Zappos to John Mackey at Whole Foods Markets, started to use it in their companies.
It's almost a paradox, because what you're now articulating with the modern elder economy, and I'd love to hear more about sort of how that arrived. But what you're describing in that book is this essentially the epitome of what I think we should be, pursuing with aging and with the concept of elderhood is this kind of elevated experience, this sort of wisdom over short-term transaction. But the an unfortunate reality in the market today, in the sort of aging world, the home care, the residential care, but also sort of more the society in general, we haven't
Sure.
got that sense.
Yeah.
And so, can you sort of describe back in 2015 then how you, because I think we had a conversation on the sideline, you were sort of starting to write your book at that stage, and how did you sort of start shifting from the Airbnb experience, then deciding to double down?
Yeah. So just the specific timing is I sold my company in 2010, kept helping to run it for about a year. And then it was about 2 years later that the Airbnb founders came knocking on my door. They had read the book Peak. They said, we want our company to be a peak company when it grows up. They were a small tech startup in San Francisco, and they were growing quickly. And they had no one in the company. They were trying to disrupt the hospitality industry, but nobody in the company had a hospitality or travel industry background. So I joined them and realized pretty quickly that I was the dumbest person in the room because I was 52 years old and I never worked in a tech company before. And so I was supposed to be brought in for my hospitality knowledge, but most of my hotel knowledge didn't really matter in this new tech world I was in. So I learned pretty quickly that they started calling me the modern elder. I wasn't sure if I liked that or not. But what they said is, Chip, you're as curious as you are wise. Because you're so clueless about tech, you're open to asking questions. You're not trying to pretend what you don't know. And so there's some areas where you're just the most curious person in the room. And then there's other areas where you're absolutely the most wise. And you have the wisdom to know when to be curious and when to be wise. The curiosity opens up possibility. The wisdom distills down what's essential. And that's when I started to imagine, gosh, I've never really thought about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And, they started saying, we brought you in for your knowledge, but we really appreciate your wisdom. And that's when the light bulb went on. And, so that was 2013. So it was 2 years later, actually 2.5 years later, that I came and spoke at your conference. I still hadn't yet quite grokked or gotten okay, where is all this going? But ultimately, in 2018, I had a book come out called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And I really spent 2017 writing that book after leaving Airbnb in a full-time role after 4 years. And I'm still an advisor to the founders. And it was in the process of writing that book that I was in Baja, in southern Baja, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas, so in Mexico, where I had a home on the beach, that I went for a run one day and I had an epiphany, or what I call a Baja aha. I had this moment of clarity, which is, I'll articulate it here. So I had been studying life stages, and I had this belief system that there were 3 life stages introduced in the 20th century. And 2 of them got a lot of money, a lot of public policy support, a lot of government attention. Adolescence, the whole concept of adolescence was created in 1904. Of course, adolescence existed before then, but there was no word for it, nor a concept, because once you hit puberty, you were an adult and you went to work in the mines and you got married and had babies. And so adolescence was introduced to the world, and it led to child labor laws. It led to junior high schools and public high schools. Only 10% of the US ever went to junior high school or high school prior to the word adolescence being coined. So that's interesting. So that became a big deal. And then retirement. In the 1930s especially, pensions and Social Security, safety net became a big deal. But the third life stage that got created in the 20th century has only gotten a bad brand, and that is midlife. Because if I say, Stephen, midlife and then fill in the blank, what's the second word that goes with midlife?
Crisis.
Yes, exactly. Which was a term created in 1965, coined in 1965. And the truth is, there's a lot of, I have a white paper called The Emergence of Long Life Learning that comes out this coming Monday. And what I've done is really studied this pretty deeply at this point. And what I found is that midlife crisis is generally a myth. People do have challenges, but a lot of the challenges they have are challenges that are common to everybody in that life stage. but we haven't really helped people in the middle of their life, what is now called midolescence. So adolescence and midolescence are the, the bookends to, much of your adulthood. We haven't helped people with schools or tools or rites of passage or rituals to help them to understand what is normal during that life cycle of midolescence, the middle of midlife, which is often 45 to about age 60. And so that's after having my Baha aha, I said, well, I'm not only going to write this book, but I'm going to actually create the world's first midlife wisdom school, because my friends who committed suicide a few years ago, if there had been some hope that after their midlife crisis, there wasn't just disease and decrepitude, but in fact, the U curve of happiness was more publicly known, which shows that people get happier with each decade after their 40s, maybe they wouldn't have committed suicide. So in early 2018, we opened MEA, Modern Elder Academy, and we've had now 750 alums from 24 countries. It's a social enterprise, so we don't pay ourselves anything. I don't pay myself anything. Over 50% of the people are on some form of scholarship. As we've gone into, during the COVID era, we had to shut down in mid-March. We were going to reopen in October, but because COVID is far from solved, we've created something called sabbatical sessions that we'll be doing for the next year. But I won't go into any more detail on that unless there's a question about it. So yeah. So my evolution from boy wonder to modern elder has sort of snuck up on me. But I'm fascinated by the subject of aging and how do we help make aging aspirational again, because there was a time in the past when it was aspirational, when people wore in their mid-20s a gray wig as a way to actually show their wisdom. And people didn't even celebrate birthdays until the late 19th century. So this is a relatively new phenomena in the history of humankind of thinking about age the way we do.
It's a fascinating issue that is less about it's a big new tech idea and more about a narrative change that we need to introduce, or part of the story. And a lot of what I've been spending on and time with Scott and the team at Shapeable with our new collective platform is about how do we build a technology system that actually is about social and systems change, not about tech for its own sake. I just want to encourage the chapters to join in. We've got a great diverse selection here in the chat. Ask questions. I want to be conscious of time, but probably only keep Chip for another 5 or so minutes. Karen from Denver is asking a question that's been on my mind. So before we fully jump into MEA, just in terms of your reflections of working with these Silicon Valley kids, and I'd sort of perhaps rephrase the idea of sort of how it was working with it. Are you optimistic? We are faced with some of the perhaps biggest existential threats the world has ever come across. There was a lot of score in Silicon Valley can save us. Now Silicon Valley seems to be pushing us off the cliff, if that's not a bit too harsh. What's your perspective of Silicon Valley and the role of tech, reflecting on having worked with Airbnb?
Airbnb is the softest form of tech there is, probably, but it has some of the best, the best minds in the engineering and product design world. So it has a foot in both camps. It's certainly a hospitality company as well. Well, here's where I'm confident and where I have some optimism is around the idea of a new generational compact. I do believe this is language that Laura Kirstensen uses at the Stanford Center on Longevity. I'm on their advisory board. We need a new generational compact with 5 generations in the workplace for the first time. And I am seeing signs that there is an openness to that. And I'm also seeing some curiosity from CEOs and HR leaders about diversity as applied to age. Whereas generally speaking, when we've heard diversity and inclusion conversations, age has not been part of the conversation. And it's now starting to become part of that conversation, which is encouraging. Where am I discouraged? I'm discouraged in the sense that, artificial intelligence and the pattern recognition of pattern recognition is an interesting thing. I have a blog called Wisdom Well. It's housed on the Modern Elder Academy website, and it's a daily blog. You get a free subscription. You just get an email from me every day. And I just finished, before I got on with you, a blog post that'll probably go out in about 3 weeks called Pattern Recognition or Prejudice, question mark. And I do think that one of the things that technology has risks around, as do humans, is the idea of taking a pattern recognition too far. And so I actually think when you have pattern recognition around humans, that leads to stereotypes and prejudging in an unhealthy way. That's not good. And when in technology you use artificial intelligence without ethics, so artificial intelligence has not been able to figure out certain things yet, which is why we humans still have a place in the world. Creativity, innovation, ethics, intuition. These are qualities humans have that AI does not have. And it worries me that AI is becoming so much more pervasive in how technology companies run, but without an ethical ballast attached to it. Where does that take us? Who knows? So that's my sort of philosophical thought of the moment. But yeah.
So a mixed bag. I think there's a lot of I think interest in trying to blend some of the ethical discussions and wisdom, as you said. And it seems to be an opportunity for those who've been around the block, who've seen the world evolve and perhaps had that broader experience.
Well, and let me say one other thing on that, Stephen. Peter Drucker 61 years ago coined the term knowledge worker. He said at a time when nobody had a computer in their home, and frankly, most people had never seen a computer 61 years ago, he said knowledge workers are going to control the planet and basically control the workplace. And what he meant was, in essence, people involved in information and technology will have the greatest power in the world. And today, 7 of the 10 most valuable companies in the world are tech companies. I think it's time to retire the term knowledge worker because no one ever uses it anymore, and to replace it with wisdom worker. Because actually we're awash in knowledge, but what is scarce is wisdom. And wisdom is not exclusive to age. Wisdom and age are not necessarily directly correlative, but they can be if you cultivate and harvest your wisdom. And so I would just say that's the other thing I think that's interesting is companies are starting to ask the question, where does wisdom exist in our organization? And they're actually asking that question on their employee satisfaction surveys, which is the first time I've ever seen this before. And that's great. They're asking literally, who in the company would you go to other than your boss for advice or wisdom? The moment we start creating a heat map in a company of where wisdom exists is the moment we start to actually elevate the conversation beyond the tactical and frankly beyond the brilliant technologists who often are extremely focused, like a computer.
I think I love that. Wisdom worker is getting some good love from the chat. I think it reminds me of a project I did recently, as a consulting project with the UK, big UK company, looking at the problem they had is that the talent and the wisdom was walking out of their door. That a significant number of the their workers were sort of later or baby boomers or just about to retire. And there is, I think, an opportunity around technology to kind of be part of that, capturing the wisdom at some level, but it's also a human issue. And sort of just leads me to the last sort of main topic I want to talk about, which is Modern Elder Academy. We've been brainstorming. I think last year we were talking about, wouldn't it be nice to create some kind of collaboration? You've built this incredible experience, which I noticed I haven't yet had the invitation to come to Baja and have an aha moment on the beach, but I think that's one of those ones that we all get there out of lockdown. But I want to come and experience it for myself. But the thinking was, we've had this idea around chief elder officers. We sort of have got a couple, wonderful June Fisher, done another couple around the world of sort of older people who've got wisdom, experience, and contribution, and want to kind of reset the balance and conversation, not just be focus group members, but actually innovators, designers, entrepreneurs. but it's not easy. I think my internet connection is a bit, can you still hear me? Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
easy for that job. And it's not easy for the employers to hire people right now. I think there's movies made about it because it's relatively rare. So I'm just sort of wondering your thoughts on the concept of a chief elder officer, and really sort of other ideas about how to get corporate more interested and engaged with older people, and using them in their workforce more effectively.
You know, since the first time we talked about it, I have evolved in my thinking on this a little bit. So I love the idea of chief elder officer. I love the fact it's a CEO acronym. And of course, I have every desire to have elder become a positive. It's sort of a word I want to take back. For those who don't know it, the word black was a negative in the United States, especially in the South. It was a derogatory term, and queer was a derogatory term, and there have been Yankee was a derogatory term, and then it got taken back. I think elder needs to be taken back. But I actually would almost shift this to say a chief wisdom officer might be even better, and only because it doesn't necessarily specifically say elder is a term that says, relatively speaking, you are older. That's what it means. It doesn't. If you're 52, like I was, surrounded by 26-year-olds, then I was an elder for sure. So I think it's fine, but I actually sort of like chief wisdom officer as well, or maybe better, because it doesn't actually define the age, and it actually defines the output of why you have that person there. You don't have them there because they're older. You have them there because they're wiser, and and then it elevates the conversation of what would wisdom look like in this organization, and what are the elements of a wise organization as opposed to a smart one. And so, listen, I would love to have a conversation with any group of people here on the call or in the Aging 2.0 community to talk about how do we help socialize the idea of a chief elder officer or a chief wisdom officer in companies?
That's a great question. Perhaps the ambassadors who are interested could just sort of throw a note in the chat, and we can take it offline in terms of like a small group and have a discussion about this, because I think that there's so many angles there. Scott in France was talking about this sort of entrepreneurial hard labor that goes on to be a startup. It's not everybody's job, or nobody wants to, if they're in their 60s or 70s, to be a 20-hour day worker living on ramen and earning no money. And so there's different ways that we can redefine what it means to add value and contribute at different life stages. But I think what you're emphasizing is just such an important message that I certainly would endorse, about the most interesting sort of aging and longevity innovators are those who are not necessarily defined as such, and creating experiences and brands. A lot of marketing challenges for companies who sort of start going, okay, well, let's make product for older people, and then guess what? It doesn't sell. And Jay Kaufman is talks about this in his book. So I think sort of like final thoughts really in terms of maybe a bit more specific in terms of MEA. You said you got these sabbatical sessions right now. It's a bit challenging to bring everybody together and have people in person. So it's a bit more about sabbatical sessions and what that thing is.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you just a few things on just MEA, and I'll keep it brief. We have an MEA online program, and anybody who wants to try that this fall, it's called MEA Online, and my email address is chip@chipconley.com. You can always email me that. The program is normally going to cost $750. We're doing it on a beta basis for $375. It's an 8-week program. You have 8 people in the cohort, and it's all done online. And it's part of its cohort time. A lot of it's your own time learning the material. So that's one option, which is you can do from home. Our workshops are incredibly emotionally and physically intimate. And so the idea of doing workshops every single week for 9 months just didn't make sense. And so that's why we moved to sabbatical sessions. And sabbatical sessions is the idea that people will stay from 2 weeks or longer. And it has a lighter level of programming, but it has our core curriculum for those who really want to dive into it. But it's really meant for people who want to do an extended stay down in Baja. It's not for everyone, because some people are thinking like, I'm not traveling right now. Well, then this isn't right for you, because this is not, this is definitely a flight. You have to fly there. No one, very few. We're in a remote part of Mexico where very few people actually are driving, doing a staycation at MEA. So you can look at on the MEA website or modernelderacademy.com or the sabbatical sessions website. We will also have an activist in residence program. We'll actually have something on the website. Pat Pinto and I've been talking about that. Thank you, Pat. I love you. She's been very helpful. And the activist in residence program is a program in which people can come and you apply, and there'll be a lot of applications, and you get a free 2-week stay, and we give you $1,000 stipend to pay for airfare and other things. And you get free massage and yoga and airport transfer, the whole thing, in order to come in and work on your activism in a spectacularly beautiful place on the beach. And John Warner, who's up on the call and said hi to me earlier, has been there and experienced MEA. He's welcome to tell you anything about it when I'm not on the line. But part of the idea is to help activists have some self-care and have some space in a place that's going to amplify their message. Because if you're an activist in residence, we'll do a guest blog post with you on Wisdom Well. We'll do a mastery hour where you're talking to the whole MEA community about what your activism around aging is, etc. So I could tell you more, but I'm going to leave it at that. And what I would recommend for anybody who finds this interesting is go to Wisdom Well and subscribe, because Monday is when we will actually launch this academic white paper called The Emergence of Long Life Learning. And I think for those of you who are really interested in longevity and aging, you will find it a fascinating read with very, very academic, but also very practical.
Excellent. We could probably chat for hours, but we should probably get back to business. But really appreciate your time here, Chip. The kind of comment that I would just sort of leave with is this, just mentioning from, Connie mentioned it from a Singapore conversation, suggesting that the cities are only, how do you describe it? Cities are only as safe and when everybody is safe. And I think this idea that we as a society need to create places and create communities that work for everybody, work for older people, work for younger people, and that's a good lens for us to think through. I think just really reinforces how vital this conversation is to the broader society. This is not a niche. This is not just a group of people talking about aging. This is about how to improve societies. And I think you've really been at the forefront, both as a thinker and a doer for many years. So appreciate your support.
Thank you.
And we'll definitely keep this conversation going.
Well, and thank you to the ambassadors for what you're doing. I mean, it's really impressive what you guys have grown as a global organization. So thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Chip.
Thanks for joining us, Chip.